Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for Tuesday, April 18th. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatow, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker once again, and joined by one of our main co-hosts, analysts, whatever you want to call them, who hail from the planet Texas, and he has the hat to prove it. He is Nick Tammaro. Nick, what's going on?
I'm doing great, my friend. After a weekend in Las Vegas with you, good to have done it. I admit I'm going to the Space City hat today because I left my regular Astros hat in Pat Cummings' closet of his guest bedroom. So I'm very worried that
he's a Philly fan, so he may have some nefarious designs on that.
I'm very worried that it's already been destroyed.
He might do that. And if not him, Juliana, she's a tough cookie.
I'll tell you what, and she became a Phillies fan really quick. So yeah, they probably burned that thing in effigy last night, and I've not been told yet. But it did. This was the reception was a little bit warmer than when I arrived there Breeders' Cup week last year during the World Series for them to open up the front door with their Phillies jerseys on.
Tell me about the visit to TaylorMade on Sunday that Philip Shelton was able to pull out of a hat.
Oh, it was great. Big thanks to Philip, and thank you for helping get it arranged. We got there around noontime, so the Stallions were in between sessions for the most part. We spent a good amount of time with Instagrand, who is a really beautiful son of Into Mischief that, of course, was a fast 2-year-old, and his career kind of went a couple of different directions, but there was a really good reception for him in his first 2 crops, according to what Philip was telling us.
Beautiful horse.
He's a beautiful horse. He looks like a quarter horse. Very, very big, very robust. Even my unskilled eye could kind of see that. We saw not this time. He was out in the field for the most part, and Philip was kind of explaining the ins and outs of his progeny and how he's just a very good looking horse and throws a very good looking horse. So tried to see Tacitus, but wasn't the first time he disappointed me in staying in his stall with the door shut. So there was no viewing him, but we saw Nick's go from afar. So yeah, it was a great little visit. Went around and saw a lot of the newly born foals and some of the horses that were actually in the yearling complex. And we actually saw the horse wasn't in the pen or in the stall. He was out, but Serengeti Empress's first foal is at who I believe is an Into Mischief also. Is at TaylorMade. So it's very, very cool. And I hadn't been to a farm now in some years, but it was great.
I think you probably made a good parenting / husbanding decision to take the girls around to see like the babies and the stallions as opposed to treating them to a live cover.
Oh my God. We had that conversation on the way over. I said, there will be no viewing of a live cover. And, but of course, I mean, every foal running around, my daughter was like, a baby horse, a baby horse. And so we walked up and went to the fence and saw a couple of them up close. And
oh, that's awesome.
And, yeah, it was a lot of fun. I didn't realize the presence of the Aaron and Marie Jones horses at TaylorMade. So that was kind of cool. And obviously an owner that was particularly big, when I was coming of age as a racing fan. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, anybody out there who can get to a farm the next time you're in Lexington. I mean, you've probably been to just about all of them. And I've been to Claiborne, Windstar, Darley, Ashford, TaylorMade now. I mean, I'm getting up there.
Yeah, it's great. I highly recommend it. Horse Country, that's a great resource, not official partner of ours, but they do a lot of great stuff, and you can book your visits. And every time I go to Lexington, I like it more and more, especially now that I found my home. I'll put in one more plug for the Griffin Gate Marriott, which was just a great central place to stay. But we are here to eventually recap the racing of last weekend. But before we get to that, we want to get to the latest Kentucky Derby news. These two topics tie in that the result of the Lexington Stakes, I imagine, will yield us another Kentucky Derby starter in Disarm, who at the very least has now enough points to qualify should they want to go based on that third place finish. We'll get to the winner and the second a little bit later in the show, but let's start off with the Disarm and this run in the Lexington. I mean, this horse, he's interesting in how still lightly raced he is. I suppose it's not unfair to say I wish I would have seen a little bit more if he was going to be a serious contender for a race like the Derby. Do you think he'll go? What do you think is next for this horse?
I mean, it sounds at this point like all systems go. They were looking to get, I guess, pretty much what they did, which was an in-the-money finish. That was what was going to be necessary points-wise. I think there's some attention that has to be paid to the whole notion that if you're in a position where you need to get points 3 weeks out, You're probably not in a position to run anyway. This is a horse I think that maybe there's a little bit more of an excuse for, because he was highly regarded coming into 2023 and just got going slowly and really didn't make an allowance race until February. So he didn't have an opportunity to run in a graded stake until the Louisiana Derby. I mean, I think it would suffice to say this was hardly a compelling performance, right? I mean, it wasn't exactly, if it was if it was a way to make the cut, you kind of needed to drain a 20-foot par putt on 18 to make the cut. You're in for the weekend, but you're not really in a contending spot. But with that said, I mean, trying to look at the whole picture, Steve Asmussen's horses don't run well at Keeneland, right? I mean, they just don't.
Have any idea what that's about? Winningest trainer of all time in North America, wins everywhere. They seem to run 2 to 3 lengths slow at Keeneland.
I mean, the guy might win races at 30 different tracks this year, right? But his horses do not perform well at Keeneland. And I'll tell you what was one of the more kind of striking performances over the weekend. And he had a horse run second on Saturday that was really well bet. A newly turned 3-year-old was coming off a bit of a layoff named Zeitlos for Stone Street. Horse ran well. Then he had another really heavily backed 3-year-old on Sunday that had been working with Zeitlos, and that horse barely got a call, and these are horses that when you see them at Saratoga and when you see them at Churchill, you see those types, they run big, so they just don't perform well at Keeneland. So maybe, it could be that he let Jose Ortiz know, don't bottom this horse out, let him try and make a run and get into position. He was beaten, I think, about 5+ lengths all in all. So he'll go. I don't know how much he'll factor into it, though.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you want to give credit, you say, "Oh, they weren't trying to win." But here's the problem: just visually watching the race, he looked like he was outpaced early and outpaced late. Like it didn't look like he didn't cross the line with a double handful. You know what I mean? It's not sure what the ethics of that would be anyway in a pari-mutuel sport, but it didn't look like, oh, just a prep, we're going to be so much better in 3 weeks' time. To me, I'm taking the negative view, but that is an interesting theory if you wanted to build the positive case that you're just going to see a horse that's completely different sauce at another track. What does Disarm's run mean for the rest of the points list? We can do a little bit of a Kentucky Derby. Maybe I'll even call that the show, Kentucky Derby Bubble Watch. What are we looking at now? Who's on the outside looking in?
So as of right now, we have the top 20, starting with Forte, going down to Continuar, who is an auto invite. So those points put Disarm at 18th. So he looks like he is safely in. He is safely in, and barring any kind of issue. The horses that are bubble types in terms of whether they might go, there's been a little chatter on Blazing Sevens. There's been a little chatter on Sun Thunder, but as of right now, it looks like both of them are planning to go. We've not gotten a rider assignment on Blazing Sevens, and the fact that Joel Rosario committed to Disarm, I think maybe makes you a little bit less certain on Blazing Sevens going. Right. So obviously the connections of Jace's Road are pulling for Blazing Sevens to not participate. That would get him back into the mix. And quite honestly, Pete, I mean, there's about 3 speed horses in this race at most, one of which is Jace's Road. Yeah. So if he doesn't go, I mean, is it possible a 20-horse race can have a slow pace? Because there's just not very much speed in here. So that's where it leaves us right now.
It has some ingredients to do that. So to me, one of horses we've talked about so far on these airwaves, I mean, does Mandarin Hero have any shot at all of getting in this race?
I would put it as very unlikely right now. I mean, he is going to need 3 defections, and I say 3 because there are 4 horses ahead of him, but it looked like Todd Pletcher was making it pretty clear Major Dude is not a Derby contender. Okay. So that would put him at 24th theoretically. He would need 3 defections to have a shot to get in. He could get on the AE list with 2 defections. Obviously, the horses in front of him, Jace's Road, Skinner, and Cyclone Mischief, they're all going to go if given the opportunity. Cyclone Mischief, certainly. So, another horse that there had been a little bit of chatter about whether he was going to go or not, Race Kane. He has now been given a rider assignment of Javier Castellano, so it looks as if he's going. And you have a number of horses like Wild on Ice and Sun Thunder verifying that are going to be big long shots, but it looks like at this point their connections are going to go ahead and take the plunge.
Blazing Sevens is an interesting one because this is a horse that I had originally assumed, based on trainer behavior in the past, that they might be very happy to wait and either go to another longer race down the line, or potentially cut back. But looking at it more and more, this is an ownership group that if I were them, I would probably want to go in the Kentucky Derby with a horse with the resume that Blazing Sevens has. I mean, it's a huge owner. You think of maybe being able to get back, and hey, a smaller owner can get back too. But it just feels like the chances increase of a smaller operation wanting to have that experience that's got to be worth more than money for a horse owner, of doing that walk over and going and bringing your grade 1 winning 2-year-old with any kind of chance, especially in a year after we saw a 200 to 1 shot win. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about Blazing Sevens turning up at this point, and that being bad news for some of these bubble horses. What do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, I think coming off a massive long shot winning, and everybody thinking, the race is up for grabs this year, because if you find the slightest knock on Forte, they're all pretty evenly matched after that. So I think anybody that's in position will go. Last year was a pretty remarkable season in terms of there being very few horses that didn't make it in the final few weeks. They pretty much all ended up going. So yeah, it's it looks right now as if those connections right there on the bubble are going to need some. They're going to need some help.
There was that shakeup, of course, late on the AEs, allowing Rich Strike to sneak in, who I did, what was it, about 10 hours of Derby content, and had one line on the horse. I'm not even risking that again. Every AE is getting their own Monster Pod entry for sure. We can't have that happen again, even if it's just a couple of minutes.
I'll ask you a question. Something that I think is worthy of a little bit of chatter about. So if you went back to the old style of points, and 50, the runner up from the final preps all got 50, you would replace horses like Blazing Sevens and Reincarnate with horses like Mandarin Hero and Hit Show is already in probably, so he's not quite the best example. But yeah, you would have things like that. I guess the question becomes, should finishing second in one of the final preps essentially be a guarantee that you get into the field?
I see a logic for it, honestly. I mean, and I was ignorant about this. I didn't even realize the 50. I didn't realize the effect that this 50 going to 40 was having. When somebody at Keeneland asked me about the new Derby point system, I thought they were talking about, the way we'd done it for the last
10 years.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was from last year to this. I mean, I have to say, Mandarin Hero, I mean, this is a horse that, was right there with a runner in Practical Move that's going to be 10 to 1 in the race. I have no problem with that argument. I guess the new system, was it designed to try to make horses run in an extra time? What do we think? What do we think the logic was? And then I'll make you answer your own question. But I have to say, just on the face, I'd really like to see Mandarin Hero run.
Yeah, it was definitely done to make you have to run multiple times. It was done with the idea that, if you take well, I guess it would have been the Charge It route, right? I mean, if you were Charge It ran in one prep, finished second, and got into the Derby. And I don't know if he's the best example, because I mean, is kind of the worst example. He was a horse that was slow to develop. So he was probably only going to run once anyway. But in a year like this, his second place finish would not have been good enough to get into the field. So I get it. I understand what Churchill is trying to do. I also don't know if, Race Kane has 64 points right now. He got 50 for winning the Gotham. Is winning the Gotham worth significantly more than running second in the Santa Anita Derby? Not really. And I almost wonder if the Gotham should be downgraded to be one of those early season races where the winner doesn't necessarily get automatic entry, because in all likelihood, the Gotham winner is just not going to be a major contender in the race. So yeah, I mean, I think the other question for Churchill Downs Incorporated is, you sort of make your own rules, right? So you can do whatever you want. Are there races that are run at your tracks that you want to designate as win your ins?
Yeah.
Do you want to say, oh, the Kentucky Jockey Club winner is in automatically? Because the Kentucky Jockey Club winner is going to be on the sideline this year, right? The Iroquois winner, I don't remember who the Iroquois winner is, but I mean, it is the Iroquois race where you want to make it a win and you're in, to encourage participation amongst 2-year-olds.
I feel like you're better off, from what we've seen about these horses and their ability to train on. I really don't have a problem making that last round of preps not necessarily wildly important, but just as important as it was. I don't see
Sure.
what you're trying to prevent. I mean, I love the idea of trying to encourage Japan to send a horse to the Santa Anita Derby. I just think it's interesting, and I love the idea. So is Charge It an example of a horse that got in last year, wouldn't get in this year? To me, he was a super interesting, didn't work out, but he was a super interesting runner in the race.
I'm going to verify it right now, but I mean, to my knowledge, he ran second in the Florida Derby, and that was his only graded stake try last year. So yeah, I mean, he went from a maiden race to the Florida Derby. He finished second in the Florida Derby and then went to the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, he's one that would have been excluded.
We should talk to somebody. I'm not sure what it is they're trying to prevent. I mean, I just don't have a problem with a maiden winner who runs big in that race coming on. It seems kind of in line with the way horses are trained these days. Maybe they, for some reason, are trying to avoid that. I don't exactly get it. It's a hot topic to pick up on. Let's do a little bit of Kentucky Derby market watch. We've had a few interesting things happen. Angel of Empire has shortened up at the sharpest book, now down to 8-1. Perhaps that has to do with the jockey assignment, or perhaps it just has to do with people becoming more enamored of that tape, as we've talked about on shows past. I mean, I feel like we're getting into just the price territory at 8-1, whereas the 10-1 was a little bit more appealing. Where do you stand with Angel of Empire 8-1?
Yeah, I think his workout the other day, I guess to many eyes, looked pretty solid. Getting Flavien Prat, which I mean, I just assumed Flavien Prat was going to ride him the whole time, was, I guess, to some was a little bit of a bonus. I do think he has that, we've discussed it, I've mentioned it before, that proverbial leader in the clubhouse type of element, because it was an effort that the more we watched preps, we realized, well, Angel of Empire actually looked pretty good. So yeah, I don't blame anybody. I think 8 is getting a little short. That's not really very appealing to me. That's a little bit less than I would want to take. But at the same time, I mean, here's a horse that's moving forward, that seems to have a running style that's not terrible for the Derby. It's not ideal, but it doesn't preclude him from being able to win by any means. So yeah, there's plenty to like about him. I don't blame anybody in this crop for taking him at, at maybe 12-ish. 8's just getting a little too light for me.
Derma Sotogake shortening up again, 10-1 now, the best price available. And I'm of two minds on this, Nick. Part of me is thinking the price is gone, etc. But then part of me just looks at this pace situation and says, you know what? He's going to be shorter than 10 on the day. Like, this horse, I don't think he'll pass Tapit Trice in the market, but he could those two could be close. And I don't know. My gut just tells me he's going to be shorter than Angel of Empire on the day. Maybe not. But it really comes down to this the speed conversation. Matt Bernier and I did a whole video, and you can check this out on the YouTube channel, going over the Kentucky Derby pace. And it seems pretty clear to me that if Lemaire wants to lead, it's his.
I mean, barring like the 1 draw or the 20, there's not going to be much in his way. I was talking to, I don't remember who it was that I was speaking with over the weekend, and they said, well, maybe Reincarnate is the horse that could show a great deal of speed in an effort to, to throw a wrench into all of it. And I could see that. I could see Johnny Velasquez maybe being aggressive, but I could also see Johnny being perfectly comfortable to take that outside pressing type of opportunity that he might get on a horse that really, has kind of gone the wrong way. And Johnny's going to ride him like a 30-1 shot or so. Yeah, I mean, it's looking, the price, the value conversation is subjective, and this whole thing about fair odds and this and that's still somebody's opinion. So it's, if you believe that Derma Sotogake has a pace advantage and you feel strongly about his prospects of winning this race, 10-1 is still a good price.
Yeah.
Is it
be laying it?
Yeah, is it a historic underlay? Again, assigning the tag of underlay is subjective. You may think that a horse is a good price at 6, and I wouldn't touch him at less than 12.
Right.
So it's just it's that type of conversation. The problem is that this is like, as far as sports betting goes, this is like you're betting on Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time when kickoff's 90 minutes away, and you're getting the worst of the price. So everybody got the better of the price already. You're getting in late. So really, at this point, to me, at this point, if you want to bet Derma Sotogake, you're waiting for the actual pool, because I still think there's a chance that his unorthodox training style and things like that, as far as Americans are concerned, could drive his price up.
And we had our wise guy experts, another video we did on here, going deep diving into the three Japanese potential runners. I mean, Klaus and Michael made strong continuar cases. If that enters the narrative, like it's one of the harder horses to guess. Though I do feel like the pace narrative is the one that could and more than narrative, the pace reality is the one that could knock that number down closer to 6-1 on the day. But yeah, I think waiting and seeing just in case. One other horse I want to talk to you about, because he's so divisive, Verifying. And Matt Bernier took much more of the view that you had on this runner and that I had initially had on this runner about, thinking maybe a doubtful stayer. Sean Borman made a very passionate case for this horse based on the internal sectionals that he had run the last day. And also, I think based on the fact that he's one of these horses who could get a perfect trip, potentially from the second flight or even on the lead. Has your opinion on Verifying evolved at all? Interestingly, market-wise, at the sharpest book, he stayed the same, 16-1, and he's shortened in other places. As this is an outlier price, but as short as 10-1 in one place. What's the latest on Verifying from you before we get to some weekend recapping?
See, this is a horse to me that's going to work this weekend, and he's going to look good doing it. He's a very good workhorse, and this is a horse who you could see come into 12 or 14 on the day itself, because there's going to be a lot of appeal to him for a lot of people. I think we've seen his best, and I don't think his best is good enough. So, I do think he's helped by being in a slow-paced race where he could get a very nice trip, but he was in a slow-paced race where he got a nice trip in the Bluegrass and he lost. So, and there are horses in there that are just as good as Tapit Trice, or at least almost as good. And so you feel like there's a little bit too much for him to overcome. If he was in the 20s, and you wanted to try and twist my arm and tell me, hey, this is a horse you really should include, I could hear it. I also have distance questions, as you alluded to. I just don't know how much he's going to stay. And for an interesting price horse, I think I need more than we're going to get.
Forte right now, best price. There's actually some 11-4 around, but the sharpest book 5-2, Tapit Trice 6-1. Let's go and talk about that Derby prep from the weekend. Neither the winner nor the second place finisher will be coming back from the Lexington Stakes, but very curious to hear your overview of this race, Nick.
I thought it was very good. I was impressed by the race that First Mission ran. There was a little moment around the quarter pole, which of course is the 5/16 pole going the mile and 16 to Keeneland, where it looked like he was kind of swimming a little bit and Arabian Lion had gotten away from him. But he's a grinder. He's a horse that has speed as well. So he looks very dangerous as far as the second and third legs of the Triple Crown go. Scott Hazelton asked Brad Cox, I think he asked actually the Godolphin racing manager after the race about the Preakness, and he said they were going to let Brad decide. And then word came out Sunday morning that their focus now is the Preakness. So I thought that was interesting. I'll tell you the other funny thing about this horse, and this very rarely happens. He has an absolutely useless dam side pedigree. I mean, the Godolphin dam sides are usually great, right? You're usually going to find at least one good horse in there. I mean, you have to go back generations to find a good horse in this pedigree. So you know what? Now you don't have to anymore because he's the good horse. So I think I'm intrigued by him moving forward, and I thought that he handled everything pretty well. There were a few. I guess there was really one no-show performance that you could maybe highlight, and that was that of Empire Strikes Fast, who never really got into a rhythm of any type. You could probably say it was too much too soon, going second out altogether after the big maiden win over Dreamlike, but he was pretty much done around the far turn. So yeah, we'll see how First Mission is good enough. I imagine Arabian Lion will probably be cut back. And
crying out for the cutback. Crying out.
Yeah, crying out for the cutback. Good horse, though. Yeah. And of course, we had to have some Irad shenanigans in the stretch for no reason at all.
We'll talk about that. The figure came back in 98, but yeah, I mean, that somebody said to me, it might have been Drew Coatney, if if Arabian Lion isn't going to get the mile and a 16th under those circumstances, he ain't ever going to get it. Because just visually, there was that moment when he's cruising and First Mission's, coming off the bridle and starting to dig and find, where it looked like Arabian Lion was going to win for fun. And despite that, Saez making that move down on the inside, kept finding, and Arabian Lion went, he basically went out like a light. Relative to the strong position that he was in.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that.
By being a little harsh?
Maybe a pinch. They were 5 lengths ahead of everybody else, basically a little over 4 lengths. I don't want to say he went away too tamely. I do think that he was eventually collared by a horse that, push comes to shove, wants more ground than him. He just looks, he gives off the impression of being probably at his most comfortable around a mile. Yeah. And I don't think that's terribly surprising for anybody. With that said, this was a circumstance where when you're isolated on the front end going 2 turns, you're always going to be at more of an advantage than you are on the front end going a flat mile. So, this was a favorable setup for Arabian Lion. And the fact that First Mission was able to stick close to him and wear him down the way he did, I think says more about First Mission than it does Arabian Lion.
For those that question that or want to know what Nick is talking about, I'll guess at what you were saying, and you can correct me. The 2 turns tend to help the speed horses. You're turning more. It enables you to go a little bit slower. The 1 turn can be a bit more galloping. You're running more. The turn is wider. You're full effort more, and it can be more tiring as a result. Is that sort of where you were going with that?
Exactly. Right. You're not getting into an elongated sprint going 2 turns. You can very easily get into an elongated sprint going a 1-turn mile. And, at a place like Churchill Downs that has a decent sized run up for the mile, you might get a quarter in 22 and change. You're going to try and wire that field. You got a lot of work to do. That's some hard running that you're going to do start to finish. And, on Sunday at Keeneland, even with the wind affecting the early fractions a little bit, you saw a horse like Key of Life who was trying to go wire to wire at the 7 furlong plus 184 feet of the Beard course. And it's hard. It's a long trip to go, even if you're isolated on the front end. So Arabian Lion had favorable circumstances on Saturday, no doubt about it. The problem is that this is a horse who got a 97 Beyer speed figure in a Derby prep. There aren't a lot of those out there, right? Yeah. So your temptation is to say, maybe I'm supposed to see how the Derby shakes out, and maybe these horses all knock each other's heads in, and maybe I go to the Preakness as well and see if maybe this might be the kind of horse that can go ahead and get the mile and 3/16 under favorable circumstances. It seems unlikely, but not inconceivable.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. Baffert, of course, welcome to run there as well, which could be a factor. And maybe in terms of a pace scenario, that's something that could that's something that could work out. Very, very interesting. All right, let's talk more about Keeneland before we move on. I was just actually pulling up quickly the pace line. The pace line puts the line on time form to what I was saying about Arabian Lion, actually uplined. So I don't know. I was thinking cry out for a cutback. The first pace figures I'm looking at say they're both just really good horses. So it
was a good. It was an atypical dirt race, right? They finished up. The pace was on the moderate side, but it wasn't slow. I think this could end up being a very strong a race all in all. And quite honestly, I'm a little pissed off I didn't take First Mission in the draft last week, because this is a horse I could really see winning the Preakness.
Yeah, that would have been a good wise guy pick. Interestingly, also the main track at Keeneland coded towards favoring closers according to their algorithm. Another reason you might be able to upgrade Arabian Lion and think that that's a horse that would have a big shot in a bet like the Preakness. Rumor, I'm talking about things out of school here, but the rumor is there may be a Preakness future wager this year. If that comes to be, we'll have to revisit these conversations for sure. But while we're at Keeneland, let's stay on Saturday. Let's talk about an Italian and this very big win with the 100 Beyer speed figure in the Jenny Wiley. As we lose Nick for a second, hopefully he just hit the wrong button and will pop back in. I'll spitball until he comes back in here in the hope that we don't have to edit. Yeah, there he is. He'll be right back here. Well, you hit the wrong button. What happened to you?
Yeah, my Mac mouse, I swipe across it to switch browsers, and sometimes it goes back. So yes. It's a piece of
No
crap.
worries. I was just talking about Jenny the Jenny Wiley and Italian's big run, 100 buyer speed figure. It was earned under ideal conditions, but I still have to say there was a moment in this race when, with the Moonlight, winds up and is making this like visually arresting move around the turn, and Arad still his double handful, where I was like, oh, are you going to ride here at some point, my friend? And then he just, I mean, you want to talk about instant acceleration. She quickened in the manner of a proper grade 1 miler at that point. So I'm going to say this was an awesome performance despite having such a good setup. How did you see it?
Yeah, not any differently, really. It was pretty damn good. She looks just as good now as a 5-year-old as she did last year. Great to have her back, and you can speed kills on any surface, and the fact that she's so quick and can ration out that speed so well. I mean, this was not much of a challenge, but I'm beginning to fear how much of a challenge she might get in this division, and unless we see. This was Charlie Appleby doesn't have another older filly that he's going to send over for these races. And so it was a pretty compelling performance from an Italian who, continues to dominate these races in large part. And I know she lost the Breeders' Cup filly in Mare Turf, but still ran a winning race. And
yeah,
I mean, her old stablemate Regal Glory's on the sideline. She's clearly better than Speak of the Devil. So yeah, I wonder, just how much of a challenge exists out there for her, because she's gotten to be very, very good and seemed to be impervious to any kind of situation that might affect other horses of lesser talent.
The interesting thing with her, well, the two interesting questions, I suppose, are what happens the next time there's a rabbit? Because we have a feeling that will happen from the Aidan O'Brien challenge at some point. And then with a rabbit and more ground, what's going to happen? Now, as calmly and easily as she made the lead, I have a feeling the answer is they'll let the rabbit go and just run like they're not in the race, and you're still going to see very, very good stuff from an Italian. But it is a question that will have to be answered down the line.
Yeah, and it also depends on how aggressively the rabbit is ridden. There's an argument to be made that you have people who run a rabbit and you have people that run a pacemaker. And so I think the quintessential rabbit for anybody my age was Loach. You remember Nick Zito would run Loach for Strike the Gold.
Yep.
Loach was going 44 and change no matter what. I mean, he was a rabbit, right? He was going after it, and he was going to bottom everybody out because Strike the Gold needed pace. The horse they ran last year, I mean, she kind of kept in Italian company, but she wasn't exactly in there to gas it too much.
Right.
Because I think they also realized that Tuesday was not going to come from a mile out of it. The situation when you get to the fall, especially with regards to the Breeders' Cup, is that now we're going to do a mile and a quarter at Santa Anita, which starts down the hill. And Chad Brown has wired this race already with
the Spa.
Day at the Spa. And Italian's a better horse than Day at the Spa, in my opinion. So, we'll see exactly what O'Brien has that time of year. It seems like the majority of Appleby's better horses are colts. So, this division seems like it'll pretty much belong to her. She'll go Just a Game and Diana and probably First Lady and then Breeders' Cup, and then she'll get sold for a whole hell of a lot of money, or Peter Brand will breed her. So Peter Brand with an excellent choice of dining establishment Friday night.
That's right. We saw
dining with the Poppers like you and I.
Frank and Dino's. It was on good. It was on point in Lexington.
It was a very good meal.
And lots of racing types and contest players alike showing their heads in there. A couple more things about Saturday before we zip back to Friday quickly and get out of here. We can't not talk about Clairiere and the ginormous run and just super exciting throwdown in the Apple Blossom. I really, really enjoyed it. Just everything you like to see. As Nick once again swipes wrong on the on the thing, and we lose him, but he'll come back here in a minute. 102 was the buyer speed figure for Clairiere in that spot, and this was just, I don't know how else to say it. It was just an awesome horse race.
It was, yeah, it was. And so I don't know if you did, and you can certainly answer when I'm done with my rambling, but when Secret Oath beat her in March, it didn't feel like that was the way that matchup is going to go long term. You know, it felt like if you're in a 7-game series, it felt like the home team snuck in a game 1 win, but you sort of thought, no, the road team's going to end up getting the best of this series. And now they came back and really, I mean, with no discernible excuse whatsoever, Clairiere beats her on the square. And it feels like Secret Oath's best races this year are going to come probably in Kentucky and Arkansas. But boy, I mean, by the time they get to New York, I mean, Clairiere's already won the FIPS. You know, she's run well at Saratoga. And barring the personal engine experience last year where something clearly happened, it feels like Clairiere is going to continue to get better. And I think running her as a 5-year-old, to me, it was probably pretty clear. Like, we want to make sure that we do everything we need to in this division to win the Eclipse and win the Breeders' Cup Distaff and let her leave as one of the more decorated horses. I mean, by that point, she'll be a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. Yeah. So her resume will look like a more probably a similar version of Malathot's. So Malathot may be a little bit more decorated, but yeah, I think that gap has already been bridged, basically.
I don't disagree, but I will say Secret Oath has impressed me. I mean, even in here,
very much so.
Attack that hot pace. This was one I wasn't sure. You know, I really thought had the best of the trips in the Kentucky Oaks, and I was against a lot of times last year. And I mean, boy, to just the kind of efforts she puts in, she's just very admirable and probably better than I once thought she was. So I'll add that while not disagreeing that Clairiere is probably a more of a cut above than the neck margin suggests, but not that much more. And then there's a Lasix conversation to be thrown in here too, potentially.
There is, right. They can run on Lasix at Oaklawn. You know, that might be part of why she runs a little bit better. She did run very well in Kentucky, obviously, in both the Kentucky Oaks and the Breeders' Cup Distaff. I mean, she ran well in the Distaff. You know, as far as this division goes, obviously the one thing sort of lurking in the shadows is what happens with Nest. Nest apparently is gonna rejoin Todd Pletcher soon, or is rejoining Todd Pletcher's barn soon. So obviously she's a long way away from running, and we'll probably be looking at Saratoga for her. But I mean, why couldn't she have an abbreviated 3 or 4 race campaign where, you know, she's up to that level? Nest has never run as well as Clairiere has on multiple occasions. And I know that people out there think I'm an idiot for saying stuff like that. I'll die on that hill. But, you know, I'd like to see them in the gate together again.
Oh my God, it'd be phenomenal. While we're on Saturday, let's go back to Keeneland just for a quick word. I thought it was a very interesting end of the contest. Holy Christmas, did horse racing podcasters and podcast affiliated people do unbelievably. And I'd like to say it was all in the money media, but we were only half of them, because you had a winner associated with Howard Kravitz and his Triple H podcast, Paul Halloran, who's a fantastic guy who I've been talking to about a book project he's working on. He may have overbet the pot in the last, but hey, I can say that all I want when he ended up with all the spoils with his $60,000 bankroll and getting all the attendant money and the Breeders' Cup betting challenge seat. But I'll say this, you know, I know Drew Coatney, our business manager, maybe had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder about being a one-hit wonder, being the strawberry alarm clock of the contest world. I think it meant a lot to him to get back to the scene at Keeneland and to put in what ordinarily would be a winning score. But the podcast affiliated stuff doesn't stop there. Mike Somich, affiliated with the Racing Dudes, been a guest on our show, finishes third. And then Marshall Graham, who of course has his own podcast on our network, BC champion, finishing fourth. I guess it makes sense for people to listen to this racing content on YouTube and iTunes, Nick.
Present show excluded, right?
It's been a minute since we've done it.
Yeah. No, I agree. It was a good run by all those guys, and obviously hats off to Jim Goodman and Keeneland, who I'm not going to say nice things about just because they pay me sometimes, but because they deserve it, and they treated everybody very well once again. 291 players in the Grade 1 Gamble. I told Jim Saturday afternoon, I said, well, your dream of having this as an on-track only contest again is dead, because there's just no way that you can give up that amount of handle. I think about a little over 55% of the players were playing remotely. So there was still a great amount of attendance on track, and which is good. I mean, Jim can sell Keeneland as an experience, and I think that's plenty appealing for everybody. So yeah, but it was a very aggressive wager by Paul. I had a nice chat with Paul before the races started. He and I had been on podcasts together and had exchanged texts and emails, but never actually met in person. And he told me about his current project, which is working on a book about Cody's Wish. And so he said, I was in search of a publisher and something like that. And I was like, well, did you talk to Pete Fornatel? And he said, oh yeah, I've talked to Pete. So I said, well, if there's anything I can do to help. And I did share the tale with him that the Bluegrass Room, somebody yelled out as the situation was going on after the race in the Bluegrass Room on Breeders' Cup Day. Somebody said, that's it, I'm not looking anymore. I'm not about to start crying. And I said, you had this room full of like hardened, degenerate horse players that were practically moved to tears as this little boy was shown in the winner's circle. And I'll tell you what, I shared, not that we need to get into Cody's Wish conversation, but I shared the video of the NBC telecast, which really was very moving. So hats off to Paul, who's not only an excellent journalist already, but is working on that book. So he'll have to put the book writing aside for maybe a few more live money contest engagements.
Yeah, I would think so. It was interesting in the last race. It was sort of we wouldn't usually talk about this race, but I think it's worth discussing Tarabi and how I just thought it was an interesting case of the market giving signal to the bettors and being right, but she won anyway. Like, and you as the morning line maker, we were talking about this a bit off. If my whole contest strategy had been betting Tarabi to win in the last race, and I saw the way that she was bet, I would have been very, very nervous about it. What I'm trying to say is I think she was extremely cold on the board, and I think it would have given me pause.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much her price was hurt by the sizable win bets that were made by contest players.
Oh, that's an interesting point, that the contest itself, it was just, she was cold from so early. I thought she was just kind of bet wrong throughout the entire thing. Completely,
yeah, I mean, she was
early, then bet, and then not bet again, and then, bumping up at the end to 5-2, a horse that, when you put her at 2-1 on the morning line, what were you guessing? If she was live, information you don't have, but like, if she was live and the barn was psyched about her and all systems were go, what price would she have been?
I thought 8-5. Honestly, I thought that class wise she really stood out. There were horses in this race that had credentials that were huge prices. And for example, Pat Cummings and I had a conversation with Craig Bernick on Friday morning, and he was talking about Muted, and he said, what price did you make Muted on Saturday afternoon? And Pat said he made him 30. And he's like, she can't possibly be 30. And I said, right, Craig. I said, you're going to look at the race and you realize she's going to be more like 50. And it's not because Muted's a bad horse. That was a tough race. But, Tarabi really stood out on paper. I thought there was an early odd shift on My Kentucky Girl for Jonathan Wong, who was bet down to 8. I made her 10. I thought 8 was short. She was one that I didn't know exactly how the public would handle her because she did have a huge local win over the track. Of course, Wong had a big win on Friday afternoon that I'm still a little pissed off about. But I thought Tarabi would get bet below that. I do think maybe some of the big win bets in the contest played a little bit of a role in that. But it was a race where, there were obviously there were people that were alive into Tarabi, and I didn't really hear about a lot of people making big exacta bets, but I thought the exacta was tremendous value when you consider 5-2 over 11-1 in a field that size paid 64.80, in a contest closer, that felt like a good payoff.
Yeah, and I think you're really on to something that I should have thought about before, and it led to these exactas. I think it'd be a super interesting thing to look at these last races in big contests and hunt around for some value, because I think there's going to be times where things get so tilted by the amounts of money being bet and the great value in the contest that, and I don't want to go down this tangent, but that even the CAW money isn't going to correct things, and you might be able to it might just be about being able to find some overlays, and maybe that's why Tarabi was 5-2. Looking at this on time form, you can really argue she ran very well looking at how the coded fraction to the quarter and the half. I was originally thinking for her to only win by a neck and get a 108 raw time form, that represented an underperformance, but this was a performance that was actually upgraded 8 points on the time form algorithm based on attending that fast pace. So I think not the first time in this show, I'm going to reverse field on a point I was looking to make and say that she ran darn well. And again, remember, this was also a track that time form had coded as favoring horses to come from off the pace. So maybe the lesson is look at these races on these big contest days, because there's a chance to just have a little bit more meat on the bone with all the money being thrown around.
Yeah, I think so. And, it's also important to remember that, there's a giant segment of the contest playing world that is made up of the people that are more skilled in the $2 win place formats that just can't get their head around betting 3-to-1 shots.
Right.
And they're always going to fall on the side of the 10, 12, 15 to ones that end up winning. As far as this race goes, and I was negligent in not looking at this earlier, but looking at the will pays just now, wasn't 5-to-1 on the In Italian Tarabi double actually a lot of value?
Massive value. A 1-to-2 shot and a 2-to-1 shot. Isn't that supposed to pay $4?
Something like that. Yeah. It's supposed to pay 9 at most, and it paid 12. So, if you do raw, what In Italian paid $3 or paid a little bit more than that?
In my value head,
Tarabi paid $7.46. So, straight parlay, yeah, it actually paid a little bit less than a parlay, but I don't think Tarabi was $7.46 in multis.
Yeah, I would have said, you said 8-to-5. I would have said 7-to-5 on the standout. The 5-to-2 was an incredible.
Well,
over.
And I know Paul's double obviously had a huge effect on it, but
but pushing it down, you know what I mean? Like that should have been an underlay, and it was an amazing overlay anyway.
Correct. Yeah.
There must have been some other huge double action leveling things out. Let me find the In Italian win price just out of curiosity.
It was $3.50.
Okay, so 75 cents on the dollar, not 1-to-2. Yeah. But I would argue that value wise, more like 1-to-2. Anyway, really, really interesting. Let's go though very quickly to, even if we speed round them, let's talk about the 2 stakes on Friday at Keeneland. Let's start with Love Reigns. How often do you see a horse checked and stopped in a turf sprint and still go on to win? I just think she's really good. Very interested to see which Ascot target they have for Love Reigns. I thought she looked great on paper because she was going to get a great trip. She got a terrible trip, and she still proved the best. Am I overrating this, or was she that good?
No, she was good. Wesley Ward continues to ruin every wide open turf sprint run in America.
Wide open. Just bet the Ward.
Wide open. Wide open is in Wesley Ward. No, she was good. It's kind of funny watching the replay back, and you pointed out to me more of the trouble that she had than I noticed originally watching it. I was actually standing outside of Keeneland, so I didn't have binoculars. You can't see much. But she had a lot of trouble. She had a couple of clear spots where she got into traffic and was shuffled out. And, looking at her running lines, that's just a situation she had never found herself in before. So something to be said for running into that adversity and still being able to overcome it. This was a situation where she got very well backed at the windows, and it does seem like when Wesley's horses get the money, they perform. There's a moment at the 8th pole where she gets steadied, and it looks like there's virtually no way she could get there. Her stablemate Lady Hollywood got a huge jump on her. So how much can a 3-year-old filly be dangerous at Ascot? I wouldn't put anything past Wesley. He said King Stand. So we'll see if she performs at that level. I imagine that's what they'll try, and the Yanks are coming.
Definitely a race that's better than the Bear form suggests. 91 by her speed figure in theory wouldn't have the King Stand runners quaking in their boots, but I have a feeling that Love Reigns is a bit better than that. Let's talk about the Maker's Mark Mile, which there's a bunch of different angles we can take. I think we won't start with the winner. We'll start with the favorite, Modern Games, who ran below his usual par and showed that maybe an Appleby runner starting in April isn't going to be as tight and ready to fire their best shot as an Appleby runner coming over here and racing in June. I didn't see the race that way on paper. I thought he'd look a lot better. Thanks to the Keeneland All Turf Pick 3, which really is my other new favorite bet, was alive to a nice score to him and just had to sort of sullenly watch Chez Pierre go out there and more or less dictate terms and rock and roll. But this doesn't take away from anything for me from Modern Games. I don't think he's lost a step. I think he needed the race.
I agree. I think that we'll see better of Modern Games down the line. It felt like in watching the replay, it felt like there's a stretch of time between about the 5/8 pole and the 3/8 pole where he went from rating comfortably to sort of beginning to get run off his feet. And I think that to me just shows that he was probably not at his very best. And when they quickened up, the second quarter was 24 flat basically, and I think the two front runners got a little bit of a breather, especially Chez Pierre, because Flavien Prat very astutely allowed Dr. Zempf to go on, and then he maneuvered him back to the outside. And by this point, they had such a head start on everybody else. It was almost as if they had gotten the best of it pace-wise, and Modern Games just had way too much to do. I thought the encouraging thing from him is that he could have easily been passed for second, but he dug in gamely and held off up to the mark. Obviously, he was no match for the winner. Was this the horse that we saw at Woodbine last year and Keeneland? Absolutely not. And so should you be a little worried that maybe that horse doesn't quite exist anymore? You could be a little worried. Yeah, you could be a little concerned. I'm a little bit surprised that he's being whisked off to England right away and that no consideration is being given to another domestic race. That was probably the plan all along, though. And so I imagine we'll see him again down the line. I mean, we might see him on Belmonte in the Poker. Right, that's got a big purse. He's probably a horse worthy of Ascot, so he'll go there instead. But we'll see him again in America, and he'll make his presence known. But hey, I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about Modern Games, and that would really be unjust for Chez Pierre, who's really outstanding.
Tremendous effort, tremendous, and a great ride by Prat as well. Absolutely had the run of the race, but some of that was excellent jockey decision and just being a tractable sort. Probably got helped a little bit by Emmanuel not breaking, but the way he let the other speed go, it's very hard to take anything away from this performance. So by far a career best, massive on time form, comes back 128. So that's like a 108 buyer. And the buyer was big as well at 103. I mean, any way you slice it, this is a horse with tactical speed who's not one way, who just really appears to have come into his own. Good training job by Arnaud Delacour and just won afterwards. I mean, I felt like such an idiot because, I do the podcast in the morning with Michael and he's just like, there's one other scenario I can see. Horse is going to be a big price. Maybe Chez Pierre gets the run of the race. If Modern Games loses, it's not going to be from a horse and back. He made all these great cases. I would have had to spend another, I don't know, less than 5% of my bet to cover this scenario. And do I listen? No, I don't listen. But so I didn't see it beforehand. But coming out of it, this is a horse that I will not be disrespecting again.
No, he's going to be well backed wherever he lands. And I suppose we might see him in a race like the Poker. That would make sense. Poker, 4-star Dave, those kind of objectives. I hope that Arnaud Delacour continues to be aggressive with him because he deserves it. And he's really earned that type of set of races. So, I mean, he has now run extremely well in 2 of his last 3 against Stakes Company. Obviously, this was much tougher than the field that he beat in last year's Henry Clark. But yeah, let's hope he stays healthy and in one piece because he makes this division a lot more fun. And you could see a big smile on Flavien Prat's face as they crossed the wire because he knew how well this horse had run. And, that's just, we're not seeing it nowadays that much. We need more good horses. So we have a good horse shortage, and I hope that we get plenty out of him.
Good horses and ones that have speed, all the better. And from an operation, from a not always based in from a not based in New York operation, I think it helps with some of the politics too of maybe getting some truer races in some of these big turf events as the spring and the summer go on. We're out of time. I do want to put in another plug for Michael Domable and also Eric Solomon and Eric DeCoster covering everything for us over on inthemoneypodcast.com. And also through inthemoneypodcast.com/plus. If you're new here, you can get our Derby package and with a bonus, the rest of our Keeneland package, all for the price of 1 month. Go to inthemoneypodcast.com/plus. Check that out. We're going to have a ton of great content there. Also a ton of stuff for free. We're going to be launching our Derby week events. You can buy tickets now, both for the Wednesday night event in Lexington. We're like a rock band. We're going on tour. And then the Thursday night event in Louisville. We'll have links up for those as part of our free newsletter, inthemoneypodcast.com/email. Or if you have any questions, reach out. You can follow Nick on Twitter at ntam1215. I'm on Twitter at Looms Boldly. Can't believe we did this whole show without talking about Looms Boldly. Why don't we do 30 seconds on him? With the scratch of the other key horse, the assignment became a little bit easier. But hey, it was great to see him show some tenacity. Figure came back a little bit low, but it was a strange figure making day, so I'm not too worried about that. Maybe we just get a price in the Mike Lee. But were you impressed with the namesake there?
He passed the open company test, so can't complain too terribly much about that. I don't know really where he is in terms of overall ability. He certainly seems to have plenty of speed. I don't know if he's simply caught the right groups of horses, but I do think there's a little bit more there, and I know Brad Cox will certainly get that out of him. So it was good to see him get the win, and I know you were probably very happy about that. One more horse I just wanted to mention very quickly also, Scylla, maiden winner on Saturday afternoon, a full sister of Tacitus, who I mentioned earlier in the show, who was a very impressive debut winner for Bill Mott, hopefully an addition to the 3-year-old filly ranks later in the year.
Yeah, that's a good shout to mention Scylla. And there was that nice maiden winner on while we're at it, let's mention that nice maiden winner from Sunday in I think it was the 6th race.
Saudi Crown.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That was I thought visually very good performance. I haven't looked at the figure yet, so I was going to do that real quick, unless you have it off the top of your head.
The figure for that race was a 97.
Huh. I'm glad we talked about it. We talked about it. Time form came back similar, with equivalent to 96. They downgraded it for the ease of the trip, but I mean, this was visually arresting stuff from a runner that, I mean, how many of these good 3-year-olds is Brad Cox allowed to have?
Well, and the funny thing too is that our mutual friend Jack Jenkins has just been, I mean, he's like a broken record talking about how bad Always Dreaming is as a sire and as a first out sire is what I mean. And so, I mean, here's a horse that was an Always Dreaming that Florent Giroux basically shook the reins at him at the 8th pole and he exploded. Yeah. So this is a horse with a very, very bright future.
All right. We are now officially out of time because we have another guest coming, and you got to stick around for this segment. A new way to bet that I think we're all going to be very interested in. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be up on YouTube as a separate video about cut and social betting. So you can find it in our feed easy enough. If you're listening on the podcast side, you will hear it right after this.